Imagine the cold, biting sensation of steel handcuffs digging into your wrists, the metal pinching your skin while you are standing on the very dirt your grandfather bled for. All because a woman in a pristine white pantsuit decided your existence was lowering her property value. It was a humid Friday evening, the kind where the Texas air hangs heavy and smells of sweet mesquite and approaching rain. And there I was, Sheriff Silas Grizz Mercer, inheriting the supreme irony of being arrested for vagrancy on my own 47-acre ranch. Victoria Vicky Sterling, the self-appointed queen of the Pinecrest Haven Homeowners Association, stood by her pearl-white luxury SUV, screaming about community standards and trashy transients to my rookie deputy, Leo Chun, who looked like he wanted the earth to open up and swallow him whole. Leo didn't realize he was cuffing his boss because I was out of uniform, unshaven, and wearing a fishing hat that had seen better decades, just trying to catch a few bass in the spring-fed lake that has been the crown jewel of the Mercer family since 1952. To understand how a seasoned lawman ended up treated like a criminal on his own land, you have to understand the land itself, this slice of heaven I inherited from my grandfather, Iron Jack Mercer, a man who believed that handshake deals were binding contracts and that a neighbor was someone you helped, not someone you sued. The ranch was my sanctuary, the only place where the noise of domestic disputes, meth lab busts, and the grim realities of policing the county didn't follow me, especially after my ex-wife, Elena, and I decided to call it quits, realizing we were better friends than spouses, leaving her with the house in town and me with this glorious, untamed silence. But silence is a fragile thing, especially when a development like Pinecrest Haven sprouts up on your eastern border like a fungal infection, bringing with it perfectly manicured lawns, draconian rules, and people like Victoria Sterling, a woman who moved here from California 2 years ago and immediately began treating rural Texas like her personal fiefdom. Our war didn't start with the handcuffs. It started months prior on a Tuesday that felt like any other until I heard the crunch of gravel under expensive tires, watching Victoria emerge from her vehicle like a conqueror stepping onto foreign soil, flanked by her sycophants, Herb Jenkins, a man with the personality of a wet napkin, and Brenda Theopolis, a failed city clerk who wielded her clipboard like a sword. They marched down to my dock where I was restringing a reel, and without a hint of irony, Victoria handed me a violation notice zip-tied to a plastic sleeve, her voice dripping with that fake, sugary politeness that is more insulting than a slap in the face. She cited me for unsightly temporary structures and non-conforming recreational activities, demanding a $500 fine, and when I calmly explained that my property predated her HOA by 40 years and wasn't subject to her bylaws, she just smiled that shark-like smile and said, "Paperwork gets lost. Rules are universal." And we wouldn't want the county commissioners hearing about a vagrant causing trouble, would we? The threat was subtle but sharp, a warning shot across the bow implying that if I didn't play ball, she would use her influence to ruin a life she didn't even know belonged to the county sheriff. I remember driving away that evening, sipping coffee that tasted like burnt battery acid, wondering if I should just flash my badge and end it. But Iron Jack didn't raise a man who uses his authority to bully bullies. He raised a man who lets fools dig their own graves. So I decided to fight her as Silas the private citizen, not Sheriff Mercer. I had no idea that by keeping my badge hidden, I was giving her the confidence to escalate her campaign from annoyance to full-blown harassment, triggering a chain of events that would expose not just a petty neighborhood tyrant, but a criminal conspiracy so deep it would make the federal government take notice. Within a week, Victoria had turned my life into a surveillance state, organizing what she called a Property Standards Committee, which was really just a spy ring of retirees with nothing better to do than photograph me through telephoto lenses. I'd come home from a shift, exhausted and smelling of despair, only to find Herb or Brenda parked on the county road, documenting my movements, logging when I fished, when I slept, and when I dared to light a campfire. Then came the official complaints, a barrage of paperwork flooding the county planning office, the Environmental Protection Agency, and the Water Commission, alleging that my little tent setup was an ecological disaster, a hazardous waste site, threatening the pristine groundwater of Pinecrest Haven. It was laughable, or it would have been if it weren't so effective, because bureaucrats have to investigate every claim, meaning I spent my days off giving tours to apologetic inspectors who found absolutely nothing wrong, but had to check the boxes anyway. The turning point, the moment the gloves really came off, was when I asked Deputy Chun to run a background check on our dear Victoria Sterling, purely out of professional curiosity, and discovered that this woman moved faster than a nomad, leaving a trail of 3 addresses across Arizona and Nevada in the last 5 years. Each stop followed the exact same pattern. She would move into a new development, seize control of the HOA board, terrorize the neighbors with fines and liens, and then mysteriously, those neighbors would sell their homes at rock-bottom prices to investment groups that vanished into the ether. It wasn't just about control, I realized as I stared at the glowing monitor in my darkened office at 2 a.m. It was about money, a slow-motion real estate scam disguised as community improvement, and I was just the latest obstacle in her path. I went to Betty's Roadside Grill, the heartbeat of our town where the coffee is strong and the gossip is stronger, to meet with Old Man Miller, who runs the hardware store and knows everything about everyone. He told me I wasn't the only one, that Mrs. Higgins, a widow living on a fixed income, was being fined for unauthorized gardening, and a young mechanic named Danny was being threatened with lawsuits for working on his own classic car in his own driveway. They were picking off the weak, the elderly, the people who couldn't afford lawyers, bleeding them dry with fines until they sold their homes just to escape the torment. Hearing Mrs. Higgins's story, how she cried because she thought she'd lose the home her late husband built, ignited a fire in my gut that wasn't just annoyance anymore. It was righteous fury, the kind of anger that makes your hands shake and your vision sharpen. But Victoria wasn't done. She was just getting started, and when she found out through her spies that I was stubborn, she decided to humiliate me publicly, posting photos of my campsite on the neighborhood app with captions asking if homelessness was contagious, stirring up a frenzy of fear among the suburbanites who viewed my ranch not as a legacy, but as a blight on their view. Then came the night of the arrest, the night she called 911 reporting an aggressive trespasser with a weapon, lying through her teeth to weaponize my own department against me. Standing there in cuffs while Leo stammered an apology as he recognized me in the beam of the flashlight, seeing the smug satisfaction on Victoria's face as she filmed the whole thing on her phone, I felt a shift in the universe, a click of destiny locking into place. She thought she had won, thought she had humiliated the vagrant, but as Leo uncuffed me and I slowly turned to face her, reaching into my tackle box not for a weapon, but for my badge which caught the moonlight like a silver star, I saw her smile falter for the first time. "Ma'am," I said, my voice low and dangerous like thunder rolling over the plains. "You have the right to remain silent, and I suggest you start practicing it right now, because you just kicked a hornet's nest you have no hope of surviving." The look on Victoria Sterling's face when the gold badge gleamed in the moonlight was worth every second of humiliation, her smug veneer cracking like cheap plaster as she realized the vagrant she'd been tormenting ran the county jail. But being a narcissist with a god complex, she didn't apologize, she doubled down. Instead of retreating, she launched a scorched earth campaign, filing formal complaints with the county commissioners claiming I was abusing my power, using department resources for a personal vendetta, and demanding I be suspended pending an investigation. It was a bold move, stupid but bold, and it forced me to assemble a war council at Betty's Roadside Grill, calling in Elena, my ex-wife and the sharpest legal mind in 3 counties, alongside Deputy Chun for digital forensics, and Old Man Miller for community intel. Elena dove into the property records with the ferocity of a bloodhound, and what she found 2 days later at her kitchen table, amidst a sea of papers and takeout containers, changed this from a harassment case to a federal racketeering investigation. It turned out Pinecrest Haven was built on a lie, specifically a zoning lie, because the original permits required a 50-foot buffer zone between the development and existing agricultural land, my land. But Victoria's house and 4 others were built 20 feet over that line. They were illegal structures sitting on a flood easement, and if a surveyor ever officially measured my property line, her mansion would be slated for demolition, rendering her asset worthless and exposing the corruption of the developer who paid off county clerks years ago. Victoria didn't hate my camping because it was ugly. She hated it because my presence threatened to expose a multi-million-dollar fraud that she was actively covering up. As we connected the dots, the harassment escalated into violence. The kind of desperate, cornered animal tactics that signal the end is near, starting with slashed tires on my truck and a dead coyote left on my porch with a note that read, "Move or die." She hired a security consultant, a disgraced ex-cop named Brock who looked like a vending machine with legs, a man who had been fired from the Houston force for excessive force, and now made his living intimidating grandmothers and single moms. Brock started following me, parking his blacked-out truck at the edge of my property, revving the engine at all hours, trying to provoke a reaction that would justify a self-defense shooting, but he didn't know I was wearing a body camera every second I stepped outside. The pivotal moment came on a sweltering Sunday afternoon when Brock strolled onto my property while I was grilling steaks, acting like he owned the place, and offered me $50,000 cash in a duffel bag if I would just relocate and stop asking questions about property lines. "Accidents happen, Sheriff," he said, staring at me with dead, shark eyes. "Houses burn down, brakes fail. It's a dangerous world out there for a man living alone." I let him talk, let him dig the hole deeper and deeper, capturing every threat, every bribe, every implication of organized crime on high-definition video and audio, creating a piece of evidence so damning it would make a federal prosecutor weep with joy. We weren't just dealing with a bad neighbor anymore. We were dealing with a multi-state criminal enterprise, because Elena discovered that the investment group buying up the homes Victoria forced onto the market was owned by a shell company registered to her brother-in-law. It was a closed loop. She created the distress, the neighbors panic sold at a loss, her family bought the assets, and then she stopped the harassment so the property values would rebound, netting them millions in profit across 3 states. I called in a favor with Agent Driscoll at the FBI, a man I'd worked with on a human trafficking task force years ago, and when I laid out the spreadsheets, the body cam footage, and the history of wire fraud, his eyes lit up like it was Christmas morning. "This is Rico, Silas," Agent Driscoll said, his voice quiet with intensity. "This is racketeering, wire fraud, extortion, and conspiracy, and you're the bait that's going to catch the whole shark tank." We decided to let her think she was winning, to let her proceed with her plan to have the county seize my land as a public nuisance at the upcoming commissioners' meeting, setting a trap so public and so humiliating she would never recover. But Victoria, in her infinite arrogance, decided to go nuclear before the meeting, calling a press conference with the biggest news station in Dallas, promising to expose the corrupt sheriff to the world. I watched from the back of the crowd as she stood on the courthouse steps, weeping fake tears for the cameras, wearing a white dress that screamed innocence, telling the reporters that I was a tyrant who terrorized her peaceful community. It was a masterful performance, truly Oscar-worthy, until the investigative reporter, a sharp woman named Rodriguez, interrupted her mid-sob to ask why the HOA had spent $40,000 on legal fees to a firm owned by Victoria's husband. The color drained from Victoria's face, her stuttering response caught on live TV, and at that exact moment, Brock, who had been picked up for a DUI the night before and flipped on her faster than a pancake to avoid prison time, was giving a sworn statement to Agent Driscoll detailing every bribe, every threat, and every illegal order Victoria had ever given him. The trap was sprung, the net was closing, and Victoria Sterling was standing in the spotlight, completely unaware that the ground beneath her feet had already crumbled away. She thought she was the hero of her own story, the brave crusader against the good old boy system. But as the cameras zoomed in on her panic-stricken face, the world was about to see her for what she really was, a predator who had finally picked a prey that bites back. The hearing room was packed tighter than a cattle car in July, the air thick with the smell of cheap cologne, nervous sweat, and the electric buzz of a small town hungry for blood. 300 people squeezed into a space meant for half that, with Mrs. Higgins and the other victims sitting in the front row like a silent jury, their eyes fixed on Victoria Sterling, who sat at the defendant's table looking like she was attending her own funeral. Commissioner Hendricks banged his gavel, demanding order, but the tension was so palpable you could taste it, a metallic tang of anticipation as Victoria's lawyer stood up and tried to paint me as a rogue cop, a loose cannon who needed to be stripped of his badge for the good of the community. Victoria took the microphone, her voice trembling with that practiced fragility, spinning a web of lies about how she only wanted a safe neighborhood, How I was a monster who refused to follow rules, looking straight into the news cameras as she played the victim one last time. When it was my turn, I didn't shout, I didn't scream, I just walked to the podium with a single thick binder, opened it, and unleashed a hurricane of truth that flattened her entire existence. "Commissioner," I said, my voice echoing off the wood-paneled walls, "this isn't about camping. This is about a $3 million fraud ring operating across 5 states." And as I spoke, Elena projected the financial records onto the screen behind me. The shell companies, the money laundering, the emails between her and the corrupt developer admitting to the zoning violations. The room gasped, a collective intake of breath that sucked the oxygen right out of the air, and before Victoria could even stutter a denial, the back door swung open and Agent Driscoll walked in with 4 federal agents, their windbreakers reading FBI in bold yellow letters. "Victoria Sterling," Driscoll announced, his voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. "You are under arrest for racketeering, wire fraud, conspiracy, and the attempted extortion of a law enforcement officer." The silence that followed was heavy, absolute, and then shattered by the click of handcuffs, the same sound she had inflicted on me. Only this time, they were federal steel, and they weren't coming off. As they marched her out, past the cameras, past the neighbors she had tormented, past Mrs. Higgins who stood tall and proud, Brock was paraded in through the side door, handcuffed and pointing her out, shouting, "She paid me. She told me to burn him out," putting the final nail in her coffin on live television. Victoria Sterling pleaded guilty to 8 federal counts, receiving 5 years in federal prison and an order to pay over $100,000 in restitution, while her husband, trying to save his medical license, divorced her and liquidated their assets to pay back the victims. 6 months later, the sun is setting over the lake, painting the water in hues of purple and gold, and the only sound is the laughter of children fishing off the new pier we built for the community. Pinecrest Haven is free now, the residents having voted to dissolve the tyrannical bylaws, turning Victoria's foreclosed mansion into a community center where Elena now runs a pro bono legal clinic for property rights. I sit here in my chair, watching the fire crackle, realizing that justice isn't just about punishing the wicked. It's about protecting the peace, about ensuring that a man can sit on his own land, watch the stars come out, and know that no one can take that away from him. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many other Victoria Sterlings are out there right now, measuring grass with rulers, terrified that someone might find out their power is built on a foundation of sand? And what about the system that let her get away with it for so long? The clerks who looked the other way, the laws that protect the corporation over the citizen. Is true justice a system we have, or is it something we have to fight for, tooth and nail, every single day? Tell me, would you have flashed the badge day one, or would you have waited, like I did, to burn the whole corrupt kingdom to the ground?